Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we're here tonight for a workshop, and we're going to take a couple things out of order, but we will still start with the amendments to the Community Development Block Grant Program, loan program.
That was like coordinating getting out of your seats.
I'm sorry?
It was like coordinated getting up from your seats.
Synchronized.
Practice that at least twice.
Yep. Well, thank you. I think many of you have met, but if you have not yet met her, this is Heidi McCarthy, who started with the city as an economic development specialist. September, I was going to say. It was 3 or 4 months ago. And she'd been an intern with us, and she actually started on this project early on when she was still an intern with the city, saying, please go out, talk to our people who've received loans and grants from the city and see what they like, see what they didn't like. And so this work has evolved from that. Let's see, how do we get this? I guess we do this. Sorry, we're having technical difficulties once again, and we don't have.
And unfortunately, Alicia's not here to help you.
I can't believe I'm hitting every button I can think of to make this thing progress, and it's not progressing. There we go. Okay. Shouldn't have been that hard. Really, it was both talking to our business owners, what works, what doesn't work. It's also reporting out. At the end of each year, we need to report out to HUD how their money has been used. And really, the way our programs were designed, really we're not dovetailing with what HUD needed reporting. So that also drove it, and it's also changes that HUD had to their guidelines. So we really tried to take programs that have been on the books for the last better part of 20 years with minor changes and really improve them and make them work with HUD's regulations. The issues that we need to address, coming back to HUD, is that CDBG dollars need to be used to either, you need to benefit low to moderate income people. You can do that by eliminating spot blight, which is what our facade programs have really been intended to do over the years. You need to create or retain jobs for low to moderate income people, which again, we've used the facade program, we've used our commercial program, saying we'll give you this money to help fix up your building, but you need to have a tenant who is going to be a low to moderate income person. You can also do a low to moderate area benefit, and that's really the folks who live in the neighborhood. If you're giving money to a business, they need to shop there. More than 50% of the tenants or the folks who will be participating there, that's an area benefit. That also works to a degree with the facades. If you've got an area of the city that's terribly blighted, we can also qualify it there, but that always got a little bit sideways with staff and reporting to HUD. And then the low to moderate income limited clientele, that's really working with low income people, either building owners or business owners who want to take advantage of our loan programs. So what we've got out there now is really a micro enterprise loan program. This is what we're proposing. And that is a change. We have not had that on the books before. I'll get into the details of these in a moment. There's an economic development loan, which we have had, and that'll be very similar to what we've had in the past. And then the commercial rehabilitation loans. These are this is where we got a little bit sideways with HUD with the rules as far as what we've been doing. We've been tending to do entire fronts of buildings for a facade, saying if you're doing it, you might as well do all of it. And under HUD regulations, you're really just supposed to do the commercial portion of it if it's a commercial loan. So Heidi has really worked hard to go over the rule book along with Jane and Misty and figured out how we can do just the front storefronts if we want, or if it's a historic building, we can do the entire facade is the plan. And then a large part of our goals have also been to do mixed income properties, and HUD regulations don't like those as well. I mean, it's a wonderful way to redevelop your downtown. You want commercial at street level, you want people living in the housing above it. We want to use CDBG dollars to help renovate these great old historic buildings that need help, but it's been very difficult to really structure the loan programs. So that's the work that Misty, Heidi, and Jane have been working on over the last couple of months. Just getting into some of the higher level details, the micro enterprise loan program, again, this is a brand new one. It is really intended to help low to moderate income people, either as a business owner or who are going to employ low to moderate income people. It's $15,000 is the max you can get from this. It's intended to be a very low interest loan program, just 1%, but at least it's being repaid. We'll make a little bit of money, but that's not the goal. It's a 3-to-1 match, so for every dollar they put in, we would put in $3. And it's really to help folks start new businesses. And we've been getting requests. This is some of the work Heidi had done, where our loan programs to date have always been targeted to the real estate. They have not been targeted to businesses. And we will frequently, people say, gosh, I need some initial startup capital to buy inventory, to help with payroll during the early years. I might need some, training, with small business counseling, but I might need help with childcare or transportation. So that's really what this program is intended for. The economic development loan program is pretty similar to what we've had on the books. It's up to $50,000, which is the same. It's been at 3% for the last few years. We're looking to put that at 5%. We are looking to have the amortization for most loans at 10 years, but given the Loan Qualification Committee, the option to extend that to 20 years if they so desire. Councilor Marcotte has been on that committee. He's, in his short tenure on that committee, has seen extended amortization requests come in. We are looking for a 1-to-1 match here, so if we put in $20,000, we expect them to do the same. As bills come in, we will split them, and each pays their portion. And this is moving beyond just real estate. Again, trying to make it a little more usable for, if somebody wants to start a restaurant and they need help buying the equipment. This loan program would allow us to do it. The way it was structured before, we could not do anything with equipment. We couldn't help with tables, chairs. If someone wants to start an office, they need desk space. We couldn't do that. We now can do it. The reason we had always done real estate is you've got greater security. This gives us less security necessarily on those items, but we certainly can underwrite it and tie up the real estate, get personal guarantees and that type of thing. And all these loans will be underwritten. So it's not like we're just looking to give money away. We really will be evaluating businesses and make sure that they are viable and worth investing in. This particular slide gets into the distinctions between what we currently have on the books for our facade program and what we're looking to move towards. What's been on the books is you could get $25,000 per visible facade, up to $50,000 per building, and half of the money you got from the city would be a grant, the other half would be a loan at 3%. The borrower would need to match that on a 1-to-1 basis, and it can really only work on the commercial areas of the building. At this point, we're looking to have 2 programs, one of which will be for historic, if it's on the National Register or in an eligible district, and the other one is just, any building, a facade deferred loan. So it'd be up to $35,000. If they're in there, the loan would be deferred for 5 years, and they need to stay and maintain it. The property must be in the downtown designated areas, and we're still working through those issues with HUD to a degree on whether it's, we're looking to expand it beyond. It had just been Lisbon Street and a small portion of Main Street. We're really looking to expand it into at least 3, if not all 4, of the downtown census tracts. We've got some information back and forth with HUD. It's not something the council itself needs to necessarily bless specifically. It's really working through the guidelines on these programs. But if you're not on a historic register, we really have to limit the facade work just to the street level commercial space. Or if you've got office on the 2nd floor, I suppose you could do it there as well. But if you've got residential above, we cannot put it in there unless it's a historic building, at which point we could. Same terms for the program, but that will allow us to use these dollars to help with residential development downtown. This really works in concert with that program. We really are wanting to redevelop these downtown buildings, get people living downtown. That helps support the businesses down there. We also, the council approved this past August, something called the Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy Area, which allows us to use CDBG dollars to help support development of market rate housing, which we couldn't do before. It absolutely always had to be low to moderate income people. If you are in that census tracts 201, 203, and 204, I believe it is. It's the area except for behind the hospital. It's the rest of the downtown. If you're in the NRSA, you can use CDBG dollars to help develop market rate units. It's a little bit higher interest rate, it's 5%. And again, 10-year amortization, 20 years if the loan qualification committee approves a larger one. The one caveat with the development of market rate units is we still need to meet the overall CDBG requirement that at least 70% of the money spent needs to benefit low to moderate income people. So we can't take all of our CDBG dollars and start funding the development of market rate housing downtown. That would still get us sideways with HUD. We'd have to pay money back. So we need to keep track of that. This allows us to say, okay, we're doing one building. It's all going to be low to moderate income. We've got another building that might have 3 units that we'd rather see as market rate. So as long as we've got 10 units of affordable housing developed, we can do 3 units of market rate. Or excuse me, if you had 10 units, if you had 7 that were market, 7 that were low to moderate income, we could do 3 that are market rate. So it's just keeping that ratio in mind. This allows us to do it if they want to develop and have requirements that keep the housing as affordable, that can get lower interest rate, 2% for up to 20 years. The match requirement is less if you're doing low to moderate income units. On the market rate units, it's a 1-to-1 match. And this gives you a sense. This is the neighborhood revitalization strategy area. It's the colors are difficult to make out, but sort of the pink areas, everything from the river basically up to Main Street, cheats over to Oak Street, up to Russell Street and East Avenue. That's the area where the market rate units could be. This is something that we're looking at for 199 Lisbon Street, right by the Jules Patry. This will open up our ability to use those dollars. In a nutshell, those are the proposed changes. Heidi's been living the ins and outs of these things. Any questions you might have?
So can you just remind us what qualifies as low to moderate income?
Up to 80% of the area median income. And I'm sorry I didn't bring down my sheet, but it really depends on the size of the household.
Okay. And is there any business counseling required as part of qualifying for these loans?
There is for the micro enterprise especially. They're required to work with a small business development group to get a business plan and present that business plan before funds are awarded.
Perfect. And then the NRSA area, that's defined by HUD?
We defined it, but it was approved by HUD.
Okay.
And it really mirrors the whole choice neighborhood.
But by HUD requirements, it needs to be a higher poverty area, correct? Yes.
Right, and the fact that we qualified as a choice neighborhood is why we were able to do it actually without a lot of heavy lifting. All the heavy lifting was getting the choice neighborhood designation. If we didn't have that designation, there was enough work involved. I'm not sure we would have gone through it, to be candid.
Okay.
So it's great, and we will redesignate it in our next consolidated plan.
Great, thank you.
One of your slides had Census Tract 202. Am I just not seeing that on the map?
202 is the area just off the left side of the map.
The left side,
And that's not included in the
Okay.
strategy area.
The hospital, Main Street.
Right, that side of it. And we're working through that, and it comes down to if we can report everything by spot blight, which is just on a building-by-building basis, we'll probably include all 4 census tracts. If we have to designate it as larger regions, we'll probably not include 202 as an eligible area for the dollars.
And from what I'm seeing, it looks like an expansion of the program. Is anything going away?
Yes, the elevator grant program is no longer with us, and the life safety, which life safety by name is going away. The way you can use the commercial loan programs, though, would allow you to do some of the improvements that were funded in the past of dealing with code requirements, so.
Is the funding increasing?
No, the only brand-new program is the micro loan program, the facade program. There's actually less money available on a per-project basis. The commercial loan program is flat dollars, and the bigger challenge is the money available. At this point, we have very little money left in our commercial revolving loan programs as well as our residential loan programs. So we're not,
Well, one of your slides said that historically it was like 25%, now it's available, it's at 35%. It seemed like it was going to put more pressure on a program that may be stagnant or decreasing.
I'm not,
These new programs. If you can go, yeah, that one right there.
well, yeah, it was up to 25,000 per visible side.
Yeah.
And, but most folks had a front and back, so it was actually 50,000 per building is
So
what most folks
number of
would-
projects could decrease based on the funding that we receive from CDBG.
It's really the amount of money we have to lend is what determines it, not so much the programs. I would think if you went from 50,000 per project to 35,000, we could actually do more projects.
Yeah.
But it still comes back to, we just don't have that much money in our revolving loan programs right now.
Well, that's why I asked if the funding was going to increase over the next few years from CDBG receipts.
I'd like to think so. I mean, we do have money that's revolving, but when we're under threat of the spend down, I think you were on the council at that point where we needed to, well, maybe you weren't. There was a point, you're not allowed to have more than 1.5 times the amount of money you receive at the beginning of a CDBG program year, plus any loan repayments that have occurred. That's called program income. If you've got more than 1.5 times that on hand 60 days before the end of the fiscal year, you have to spend it or give it back. You've got to give the money back to the feds. They don't want it back, they want us to spend it. And so while we had revolving loan programs that have worked beautifully, we had about $600,000 or $700,000 available specifically for putting into all of the programs we just went through. If we had held on to that money, well, we couldn't hold on to the money, so we ended up putting it into public infrastructure projects. We slip-lined a lot of the sewers in the downtown. We put money into public parks in the downtown. So it was all eligible purposes. Council made those decisions. But we went from having $700,000 sitting in revolving loan programs that just kept recapitalizing themselves. We're now down to 100, 150,000 in those programs, and 1 or 2 projects can take all the money. So that's our challenge. We may be to the council, probably not this year, but probably the following year. We might need to recapitalize those programs.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
And Councilor Ray has joined us. We will continue in the correct order. I believe it's Dale and Kevin.
Thought we were going to need to.
Oh, no.
Yeah, take trouble.
Should like write instructions or something.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. With the discussion that's been going on recently around Lake Auburn and some of the media, we wanted to update you on a program that we're planning this spring to protect that resource and give us some time to better protect the resource. And we wanted to make sure you understood what we were considering as we were considering it, before some of the rumors and other things get out. So I think I was going to have Kevin go through the program a little bit, and then we can answer some questions.
Sure. Good evening. We experienced a large algal bloom in 2012 that resulted in fish kill. Since that time, we did a large study. We also went through and did a lot of sampling, try to identify what the sources were. And there were some recommendations that came out of that study with CDM Smith, along with some doctors that were working with them and collaborating. Some of those were to do some in-lake treatment, as well as go after the watershed efforts. So we've never backed off from watershed protection efforts, and we're not proposing that. Last summer, with the increase in some of the turbidity and some of the algae counts, we actually did a small dose of copper sulfate, and that was to try to preemptively strike a bloom like we experienced in 2012. So as part of CDM recommendation, we've been pricing out, we had it in the CIP, estimating 2.4. Some other estimates I have generated back in 2013 were around 3.3 million for a full alum dose of the lake to lock up not just the phosphorus in the water column, but also the phosphorus in the sediment. That's not what we're proposing. In looking at what happened in 2018, and we had some taste and odor issues throughout this winter until we had ice over, really. The source of the phosphorus was really from the surface. It didn't come from the sediment this year. So if you can stop the surface or the water column phosphorus from starting that algal bloom, you won't have the die-off, the decay, which then releases some deep water phosphorus available in the sediment. That happened in 2012. So the proposed plan is scaled back because we're not trying to lock up the sediment. We're trying to treat anything that's 30 feet deep or deeper. So 30 feet in depth around Lake Auburn into the deep hole. And the proposal is to strip the water column of phosphorus early so we're not dealing with the algae growth. We're not trying to kill the algae. We're trying to remove the phosphorus and keep the turbidity down, which is what we're really regulated by. You know, our waiver from filtration deals with turbidity. Any particulate form can actually mask our treatment, and that can result not just in taste and odor, but possible health issues. So that's our main focus, is keeping the water safe, preventing that type of algal bloom. Right now, we're currently revising a permit with Auburn Water and getting that through DEP. Alum is not considered a pesticide or an herbicide. It's actually used in conventional water treatment plants that do filtration and other type of treatment. We don't currently use it in our treatment process. We use chlorine, we use UV light to inactivate, and we use ammonia to bind up to create chloramines. So this is safe. It's part of used in safe drinking water plants. It's not targeted at fish or other things. It'll actually grab the phosphorus out of the water column, bind it up, it'll drop out and be on the sediment floor, on the floor of the lake. We're looking to do this application in June, so that's before the growth of the algae, and we're not trying to deal with algae, we're trying to deal with the phosphorus in the water column. Much later into that, we start getting that algal growth. You start getting some of the other algae that can actually change where they are. Not all algae just float on top. Some algae can actually come to the top during the day and grab light and grab nutrients and grow, and then at night they drop into the water column and go to the bottom. So our plan is to get approval from you as well as the Auburn board as well as the regulators. We have Dr. Wagner on board, who's been our advisor since we worked with CDM Smith in 2012, who's been, really an expert in the field on how do you actually treat a lake, how do you actually dose either the algicide we did last year or what's proposed this year with an alum treatment. The initial dose we were targeting is 2 milligrams per liter over that area. We're looking at probably 16 days of treatment using a boat similar to what we did this summer, applying the alum in a grid pattern to make sure we get good even coverage. The vendor that we're looking to use, qualified New England vendor, respected and really focused on being compliant with the regulations and doing a good job. They do other surface water, but they also do other things in Massachusetts where it's not really a drinking water standard, it's a different standard. So they're comfortable with all of that, and they work closely with Dr. Wagner as well. If things go well, you'd see it drop off, and we'd be targeting inputs to Lake Auburn. So there's different brooks that we're seeing high numbers. We've started to test those. We'll be going after those with some watershed projects. And doing this alum dose would give us about 5 to 10 years, depending on what we can stop. If we have some large storm events that wash more sediment and more phosphorus into the lake, that time would be shortened. We're not seeing the storm intensities decrease. We're seeing warmer weather. Those are issues. So we want to go after those watershed inputs as quickly as possible and stop the input of phosphorus while we have low phosphorus numbers actually in the lake.
I think one of the differences between the alum treatment and the copper treatments are toxic to many aquatic organisms, all pretty ubiquitous. Alum's really just stunting the growth of the algae, and we want to, as Kevin said, we want to get it in early before the algae begins to bloom. We get that turbidity. What it also has a benefit for is the environment of the lake. It'll keep the lower sediments from, lower stratuses from going anoxic and affecting lake trout populations. So it has some other side benefits as well.
Questions here? Councilor Ray.
And this is being presented to the Watershed Protection Commission tomorrow, is that correct?
That's planned to be discussed tomorrow as well.
As long as there's no snow?
We're debating on that.
Okay, great.
We'll wait
And
to see
then-
what else goes on tomorrow.
And do we know when Auburn is considering?
They've actually talked to their board already.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We were hoping to get here first, but we didn't win.
And just as a reminder, it's the Auburn Water District Board, not the City of Auburn Council.
Councilor Cludier?
Ed just clarified what I was going to
Oh, okay. Councilor Marquardt?
Yes, a couple of questions. Funding. Is the funding already in place, or is this part of this year's LCIP?
The request is, I talked about it last year, that something might happen, and we had some money in there for a small algicide application. The request for this is in the current CIP for 2020.
For 2020?
Correct.
Going forward. So we would need to approve that in the next few months. The alum, like, you're describing it as, it binds with the phosphorus and lays on the sediment. Obviously, it breaks down over time, the 5 to 10 year mentioned.
No, it kind of, it's a little different than that. If you think about the lake as a stream, but a fat spot in a stream, wide spot in a stream, right? So there's a lot of water coming into the lake. There's water leaving the lake, either through the brook or through production for drinking water. What we're trying to do is reduce what's in that wide spot in the stream. Stream's always flowing, but there's a wide spot that delays, and I think it's about a 7-year turnover cycle. So the water that comes into the lake, phosphorus continues to build from that. At the same time, it's being taken out the other side. The problem is more phosphorus is entering the lake currently than's leaving the lake from those other two sources. This is just simply to strip the water out, to give us some time to go mitigate the phosphorus coming in. We have a couple of projects we've been looking at. We're beginning to work through those and see if we can mitigate. If we can get that phosphorus in mass balance, so the same amounts coming into the lake as leaving the lake, then the lake's stable. It'll be stable in perpetuity. And that's really the challenge, is trying to reduce the inputs. This is just buying time to go get those inputs. The phosphorus has been rising over time. And this is just to knock it down.
If you have a couple of these elements in the lake, then phosphorus is bad. Especially when it's in volume and it comes through our drinking water intake. Alum, I assume that means aluminum?
So it's aluminum sulfate that's applied to the lake.
Okay.
When that hits the lake, it turns into aluminum hydroxide. And aluminum hydroxide, if you have a boat or you have something that's aluminum outside, like a fence post, you know the white crust that kind of grows on aluminum outdoors? That's aluminum hydroxide. Aluminum hydroxides, as Kevin mentioned, is used in all kinds of purification in water treatment. It's also used in food products. It's also a component of Malox and a number of other antacids. So it's a food-based product. It's aluminum sulfate. And it does convert, it does go to the bottom, and it pretty much binds the phosphorus in perpetuity. The problem is we have more phosphorus coming in. That's what Kevin's talking about, trying to knock out.
Perpetuity, it doesn't break down?
Does not break down, or not substantially, no.
So the source that we have right now coming from the sediment, the majority of the sediment in Lake Auburn is iron-based. And when the pH of the water changes because it goes from an oxygen-rich environment where the fish can be sustained, and the oxygen's used up in the decay, now it frees up because of that change in pH of the water. It now frees the phosphorus and is released from the iron sediment. So when alum is used, that's one of the weaknesses of Lake Auburn now, is it's mostly an iron-based sediment. In lakes with aluminum-based sediment, the uptake of phosphorus is bound up and not released during changes of water quality.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to Land Development Code Design Guideline Review. Mr. Green.
Good evening. Back in December, staff came before you with a proposal to update our design regulations, and the funding for that project would come from comprehensive plan implementation that was allocated from a few years ago, so it was funds that we were looking forward to be able to use. Again, we were wanting to hire a consultant to help update our zoning ordinance, our historic preservation review design manual, and also our site plan and design guideline manual that's found in the zoning ordinance. So we got a positive response from you. We went ahead and moved forward. We put out an RFP. We also had working with the Finance Committee, we've got a selection committee that's been working. As a matter of fact, just before this workshop, we had our selection committee get together and look over some proposals that we received. So we are moving forward on this process. We're looking forward to keep that process going. So we're here, I am here, not we, me. I am here tonight to bring you some more information about looking to create a advisory ad hoc committee that would be made up of certain folks that would have expertise in areas that would be beneficial in the review and creation of these updating of our design regulations. We're looking to include folks from the Planning Board, the Historic Preservation Review Board, the City Council, someone from the development community. We'd like to have somebody who would represent the interests of downtown. And so with that, we put together a resolution that's part of your packet that describes what the ad hoc committee would be, its purpose, the duties, composition. Again, repeating what I've already said, we were looking to have the mayor make appointments for folks that would be able to help guide the process, and we also are looking to have a robust public participation process, so it's not going to just be an advisory committee, but we want this to get the work out to the community, get a lot of public input. So it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple, but I'm here to answer any questions you might have and get your thoughts on this. We'd like to move forward.
Councilor Cloutier.
So I guess I'd like some clarity around what or who a representative of the interests of downtown Lewiston is. I think we've gotten into some trouble around not being as inclusive as we could be.
We certainly are open to make it inclusive to other parts of the community, other areas. I think the intent was that while it's not decided where these updated design regulations would be put in place, that I think the direction seems to be focused on our downtown area, the mill districts, some areas of neighborhoods close by the city, but this is open to you and the mayor, who you think would be important to have in there. We want to make sure we're covering important areas.
I'm less concerned about the downtown Lewiston language than I am about the representative of the interests, because I think that people have different interests.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I think just some clarity around what.
So you're
that
suggesting
means.
just striking out representative of downtown Lewiston would be
I mean, I just.
acceptable? Or?
Are we talking about somebody who lives downtown? Are we talking somebody that owns a business downtown? Are we, like, what are the parameters around that, I guess?
Right. I guess we were trying to not be overly specific.
Right.
And
I
not
know that
specifically
that's a
say,
hard-
for example, the Downtown Association.
So that was my question. Are we talking about somebody like a member of one of those associations, or are we talking about somebody who lives downtown? And if we're not, and maybe we should have both of those people?
Right. We've also beat around, David and I, talking about As a citizen representative. I mean, so, again, we want to be able to
Right.
tap into stakeholders that are going to have important input on this process, and that's why we're here today, to get your input, and be glad to hear more ideas, and if we want to add a little bit, a few more folks, or be more careful about the wording, so we're not limiting or going in the wrong
Right.
direction.
So I would say resident representative. And I think it's interesting to think about also including somebody from the Downtown Lewiston Association or the chamber, perhaps.
When you say a resident, downtown resident or a resident anywhere?
I mean, both, maybe? I don't, I think if I understand we don't want this to get unwieldy, right? Like, we don't want this to be a huge thing, but I do also think that if we're going to take the time to do this, we should do it right, and we should probably include as many voices at the table that would be affected by the process.
And in keeping in mind that we're also going to be having a public participation process, and we certainly want to have open avenues for communication and ideas from the public at all stages of this too, so, but, very good.
Yeah, and that was going to be, my comment too, because that was a very open-ended, representative of downtown Nishtick. Could be a business owner, could be developer, landlord, resident. We have 2 city councilors who represent the majority of the downtown, so there's a lot of play with that
Do you
one.
want to specify either a property owner or business operator downtown? Would that
I mean, where
clarify
this
it?
is,
Then we get out of the resident piece, right?
Well, but
So-
we've already talked
Okay,
about
so we're already
adding a
adding- okay.
resident.
President.
So what I heard
Should give us
before
a
was
lot
we
of
wanted to
numbering.
add a resident, downtown resident, and a resident at large from the community.
Yeah.
And I just thought we need to clarify downtown, and one of the ways to do that is to identify either a property owner or a business operator, or both, could be both, obviously, someone who both owns property and operates a business.
we could just change letter H to interests of downtown Lewiston business.
Let me just say property owner,
Registered
property
representative
owner,
of
or
the
business
downtown business
operator.
community.
Yeah.
I mean, if you
something
said
like that.
representative of the downtown business community, then that could be somebody from the Downtown Lewiston Association, or it
Mm-hmm.
could be somebody else.
Okay. And again, I think that would be a good thing in the sense that we were wanting to have representation of other bodies. So someone from the planning board or the Historic Preservation Review Board can continue to keep their respective boards up to speed on what's happening as well.
And I think adding a resident is a good idea too. That would be-
Okay.
That would be helpful. Mr. Marco?
A little confused with the discussion, but did I hear you just say adding another, let's say, I after H?
I and J. I would be a downtown resident, and J would be a resident at large from somewhere else in the community.
Okay.
That was what I heard Kristen suggesting.
And
We
keep-
want to do 2 residents?
I think that makes sense. That way it's not, entirely downtown focused. I think that's another criticism that we hear is that, we focus a lot on downtown folks, and
Right, and it's not to say,
this is something that affects the city as a whole.
I mean, there's a possibility of these designs, in the areas of the design updates, maybe extending out into neighborhoods or commercial corridors, so, yeah.
Good list, now we got to stew on it.
The discussion at the Selection Review Committee this afternoon discussed just that nature of this proposal, that it seemed to be limited with 8 people, 3 who are staff, and therefore only 5 that are not staff. So I like the idea of adding 2. I assume that H is staying the same, or did I
I
hear
think we said that was
different
gonna,
language?
Tweak it.
Tweak
that
it?
was gonna be downtown business.
Okay. So a tweaking of H and an adding of I and J. And I just wanted to make the point that I think this program has as much impact on Lewiston as the comp plan. And adding members shouldn't give us heartburn. We had, what, 15 on the comp plan, if I remember right? And,
To be fair, the comp plan took like 5 years to.
yeah, yeah, we,
And half of those people never showed up.
Not 5 years.
This project isn't done yet.
Neither is the comp plan.
and we definitely don't want that here. But depending on the scope, as to whether it's limited in geography to the sections of the downtown, Centerville, Mill District, Riverfront, or if expanded out to NCA, NCB, et cetera, would make a difference. And if that seems to take that sort of direction, we may need to consider putting more funding in as well.
We talked about that.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else? Absolutely.
So similarly, I was hoping for clarification on G, a representative of development community. What?
I missed the word "the." Yes.
Oh, I was like, is that a organization or something that I didn't know?
No, and it was an important, I'm glad you asked that question, because we feel it's very important to have somebody on the committee who would represent the interests of the development community, whether that's a contractor, a builder, a developer.
Okay.
They need to be at the table to make sure that whatever is being discussed and proposed isn't going to be a hindrance and affecting, in a negative way, raising costs of project unnecessarily. We want to keep a balance on this project, so.
Great,
That's
thank you
what
for
that's about.
clarifying that.
Thank you very much, Doug.
Appreciate your ideas. Thanks.
Okay. Everybody's favorite subject,
Dun, dun, dun.
marijuana regulation.
I'll come help.
Weed ordinance number 2.
All right. So we were left with the impression back in November that you folks wanted to keep talking about this. So we have caregiver operations, and that's primarily what we talked about before, but we have the whole adult use regulations, which we have not talked about. So I'll try not to read this verbatim, but there's some good stuff in it. We got two laws in front of you now from the state, the Adult Use Marijuana and the Maine Medical Use Marijuana Act. So each one of those has specific language as to what can be regulated in the community. As far as adult use, we are allowed to regulate cultivation facilities, product manufacturing facilities, testing facilities, and stores. And then cultivation is broken out into some sub-tiers, and then there's nurseries as well that can be taken into consideration. We can regulate all those. We can regulate home cultivation, but we can't prohibit, zone, or license the activity associated with home cultivation. And I'd have to check, but I think home cultivation is either limited to 1 or 2 plants per person right now. As far as medical use, that's what we currently regulate in the community. That's what the action you folks took back in November. All we currently allow in the community right now is caregiver grow operations, so that's essentially 30 plants. The retail establishments that we have, those are now legally non-conforming given the action that you folks took. So what can we regulate under medical marijuana? Registered caregiver stores, registered dispensaries, marijuana testing facilities, or manufacturing facilities. We cannot prohibit or limit the number of caregivers. So again, a caregiver could be any one of us at home where you're either growing or where you're taking care of somebody for their medical marijuana needs. This hasn't been an issue yet because we don't talk about adult use, but the state law does not allow a medical caregiver store to sell adult use marijuana. So we don't even really have to worry about that, but from the state's perspective, if we have these existing medical retail operations in town now, and all of a sudden they wanted to start doing adult use, you can't. You're either doing one or the other from the state's perspective. What are we currently regulating? Again, there's a number of zoning districts where we have the registered caregiver grow operations. Those are in 4 different zoning districts, all non-residential districts. We do have and then there's the retail caregiver stores, and those are allowed in 11 zoning districts. And when we allowed those, that was under the guise of a medical use, so that wasn't necessarily retail use, even though they are retail, but we were advised that it should be for medical purposes. So we have 31 licensed caregivers in town, and 15 of those are for retail or a combination of retail and grow. We don't have any dispensaries, we don't have any manufacturing facilities, we don't have any testing facilities, not that we're aware of. So what do we think you folks should consider doing at this point? Ed and I and the police chief have talked about this, and we're of the opinion that we should probably be regulating these the same, both adult use and medical marijuana. Just treat them the same. If we're allowing one in one zoning district, we'll allow them in the other zoning district. Don't think there really needs to be a distinction. There's a table here that kind of shows what the different uses are from the state's perspective under adult use and then medical marijuana, and then what we would do there is potential definitions of what's a marijuana business versus a marijuana store. As far as where we would allow these, this obviously is going to involve a little more thought, but again, we currently allow a number of the grow operations in 4 non-residential districts. And that's probably not inappropriate, really. I mean, these are non-residential districts. The problem is a lot of our non-residential districts immediately abut residential districts. So our commercial corridors, with the exception when you get to the outer limits of those, there's residential uses essentially behind all of them, right? And, if you're going up Main Street, Sabattis, Lisbon Street, I mean, you go 100 feet deep and all of a sudden you're in somebody's backyard. So a way to potentially limit the adverse impacts, if there were going to be any from any of these stores or retail establishments, is to come up with additional performance standards, which is we'll talk about. Same thing with marijuana stores. I don't know that marijuana stores are going to have the same impacts potentially. I mean, it's more about probably traffic and clientele versus odors, which you would more likely find from a grow operation. But we've talked to people who want to do manufacturing and testing as well, and there may or may not be odors from those establishments depending on the size of their operation and what they're looking to do. So again, we might want to regulate all those non-residential ones into one group, as I've suggested above, as a marijuana business, and then have stores as a separate category entirely. I think the performance standards is really where the city is going to want to think about how and where to put these. I mean, we can look at a zoning map and we can all say that, hey, great, a commercial zoning district is an appropriate spot for some type of use, but again, it's really how they're operating and their proximity to other uses. So some things that we might want to think about are odor, ensuring that they have proper air handling units and that it's not detectable off-site, and we need to put some language into that. If they're in a rental property, if they're in a strip mall, how do we do that? We don't necessarily want it to be not detectable at the property line, but I don't want to smell it in the next unit next to me in the strip mall. So we need to come up with language with that. Locational requirements. Some of you are familiar with that. For better or for worse, we have some locational requirements now for drinking establishments, which I think some councilors and planning board members have talked about trying to actually relax those. But that might be a good model for us to follow for these types of uses if we're concerned about proximity to one another. So possible separation between caregiver operations, retail operations, grow operations, setbacks from schools, daycares, churches, from residential uses or residential zoning districts. I should note that some of the state law actually speaks about separation from schools, and I think it's 1,000 feet and maybe be able to reduce down to 500.
It can be reduced to 500. The state standard is 1,000.
There's nothing that says we couldn't make it, 1,500 feet if we wanted to. So again, we can talk about that, and we can do a mapping exercise to figure out, what we're talking about, to see what kind of impact. I think a big one would be the setbacks from legally existing non-conforming residential use or residential zoning districts. That would absolutely speak to the narrowness of our commercial corridors. So if I have a lot on Lisbon Street, say, like around where KFC and Taco Bell is, it's all residential right behind there. the residential zoning line is right behind there. If there was a setback that said, hey, you have to be, 1,000 feet away from a residential use, well, clearly that's gonna, put that property out of contention there. You could go as far as to say a non-residential use, a non-conforming residential use in a commercial zoning district too. Sabata Street is notorious for that. Once you get past Randall Road and Old Green Road, there's lots of residential uses on Sabata Street, but they are in a commercial zoning district out there. So if I could put some type of marijuana use in that corridor, do I still want to allow them next to essentially a grandfathered residential use? If you folks are concerned about that, we could have a setback for that as well, even though they may be appropriately zoned. Limit the size of the business of the stores. There are some communities that actually do that, so you don't necessarily have, the big box store of marijuana. Limit the hours of operation. Again, some communities contemplate that, if we're gonna have a 24/7 operation. Do you guys wanna see that in the community or not? Prohibit drive-through operations. I don't know, it makes me smile. I didn't know that you could do that, but why not, How can everyone's thinking ahead of us on all of this. Even that's the challenge with all these regulations. Even at the state level, is the operators, the growers, they're very much in tune as to what they can and can't do. Security measures in place. We already have some provisions in our ordinance. The thought would be to beef those up. PD is involved in those inspections right now. Sign provisions, limiting the area dedicated to images of marijuana products. We've had some people in the community express concerns with some of the signs that are in the community. Some people do things that are tasteful. Some people do things that think people feel otherwise about. We don't necessarily regulate the beauty of these signs. And that might be a delicate area for us to get into, but we can explore that. And then coming up with some criteria that potentially would just disqualify someone from applying for a license in general. And this is a conversation we had with Chief O'Malley. Some suggestions could be looking at convictions over the last 10 years, misdemeanor convictions, knowingly submitting an application that has false information, failure to demonstrate the ability to maintain adequate premise liability, other criteria that are established by the state, bankruptcy proceedings, tax delinquency. It'd be nice, the police department would like to have a little more discretion as to how far and what kind of offenses we can regulate with.
No, they like to have a little bit more clarity. They don't like the fact that a felony conviction related to the business, that's a vague standard, and I think we've had problems with that both at the council level on an appeal and also at the Board of Appeals level on an appeal. What's related to the what kind of felony convictions are related to marijuana? If you killed somebody, that probably not, I guess. But is that who we want operating? So I think we want a clearer standard so there's less confusion.
And certainly, the chief could speak more clearly to that as what he's looking for. Amended specific performance standards. What am I saying there? Simplify our ordinance. Right now, we have provisions both in the zoning and land use code and in the code of ordinances. Quite frankly, we just need to revise it. I think it can be simplified so it's easier for staff to interpret and for me to hand to a caregiver or an adult use
We want
business.
everything together in one place.
Fee structure, we currently have a fee structure of $550. I can tell you that we think that is probably pretty reasonable, given the amount of time that we're involved in these. It's not unusual for planning code enforcement to be involved in inspections. That's part of one of our duties, but because of these establishments and having a lot of involvement both from fire and police, particularly in the police side, it's not something that they're routinely doing, and we're using up more time and resources of theirs. So the thought is that we would be looking at some type of fee structure there. With the help of Kathy Monte, we've looked at a number of communities, and people are ranging anywhere from $500 to $5,000 over a different range of communities based upon the size of the operation, whether it's just a caregiver grow, a retail operation, a dispensary. So I think we'll have some range of licensing there depending on what the size of the operation may be. That's kind of it. So we're looking for guidance as to do you think we're going in the right direction? What do you want us to do next? Do you want us to do anything? Maybe everything's fine and status quo, and we're not gonna allow any more operations in the community. I can tell you, we have had people ask us about manufacturing, and I've met with a couple of people about that, and that seems like that would be a legitimate use for, you know, an industrial, light industrial area, upon them, you know, meeting certain performance standards, but because it's not a use that we've contemplated right now, we've been telling people, sorry, not in Lewiston, but that might be an opportunity for the community if they want to get into that type of thing, to allow those uses to occur.
And there can be significant capital investment involved in manufacturing processes. I think the one group we talked to was in the $500,000 to $750,000 range for the equipment.
And we
There
do,
is some lack of clarity at the moment about whether that equipment is eligible for the business equipment tax exemption program or not, but I think that needs to be worked out. If it is, we only get 62% of the taxes we should. I suspect that may be addressed at the legislature at some point. But there are some significant investments that can potentially be made. And I think our feeling is that both the manufacturing facilities and testing facilities are something that's going to be established, that we ought to at least consider allowing in our non-residential zones appropriately with appropriate restrictions.
and for what it's worth, when we do inspections right now of these new establishments, between all the departments, we actually invite the assessors to attend too, so we can actually get some of that personal property involved in there.
So my number one concern in here is the signage and the facade. I know Ed and I had the conversation, you know, I spent 5 days out in Colorado, and for some reason I didn't notice any of these places. So they do a really good job there, and, you know, Ed and I went on Google Street View and looked at a lot of the businesses. They're very well done. There's not a giant neon pot leaf on the top of the sign. So having something very tasteful, yet still effective would be my biggest complaint.
So I would agree with the mayor in terms of signage, and I think even right now with just the medical providers, some of our signage is
Over the
not,
top, yes.
not great. And in places where there are residences, so multifamily buildings who are overlooking a neon sign. So maybe that's more a question of our neon sign ordinance than it is of our.
Well, we do have the specific ability to regulate the signage for these facilities, which I think gives us an opening to be stricter with them than with other users. I'll also point out that if we do choose to allow either medical or adult use retail stores, that a lot of the ones we have now most likely would be non-conforming. So for example, the one on Lisbon Street is probably way too close to a residential property. If we have even a 500-foot, it's probably abuts a residential property. So that if that business ever goes out of business, that would no longer be permitted there, if we go in that direction.
The second thing is in terms of licensing fees. I think if we're seeing ranges from $500 to $5,000, and we're talking about $550, I think we should take the harder look at raising that.
I'd be happy to do that, and be happy to also lower it if the state legislature would give us some of the revenue that the state's going to get off of this.
That is on the docket, so people are having those conversations. And then, lastly, Dennis, maybe you can help me here. Corey Brown, who works for Healthy Androscoggin, is coming to the Lewiston Area Public Health Committee meeting on Thursday at 3:30. She helped Auburn create some of their zoning and work through some of these issues, so it might be worthwhile, Dave, maybe someone from your office to come to that meeting, and certainly the entire council is welcome to attend that meeting as well. Again, I feel like this is an overwhelmingly large conversation, and so I feel like as much guidance as we can get from somebody who knows kind of the ins and outs of this is helpful.
Anyone else? Councilor Mark.
I don't think it's a surprise that I want this to be the most restrictive as possible. I do agree with the mayor with regards to signs. Not sure what the actual word for it is, but when they dress up like a blunt and stand out front and promote.
Yeah, I think that is probably clearly illegal under the new statute. We could make an argument that it's appealing to
Kids.
minors.
I'm not, it's not really a sign, but I'm not sure what the vocabulary for that would be. And I'd be very concerned with allowing it in anything that even resembles or comes close to residential. When I see Centreville and downtown residential, definitely wouldn't want it near downtown residential.
What's that? Okay. Counselor Ray.
Great. I am in support of these performance standards for the most part. I think it's considering a lot. The one thing that I didn't see on here that I think is happening, multiple operations in one space. I think that's currently happening at 7-Eleven Lisbon Street, where there are multiple organizations all renting out from the same facility. Is that something that can be addressed within the law? Should it be, I guess, is the second question.
The state will allow that, as I understand, for medical marijuana. I don't know about adult use.
Okay.
There are some provisions there, and I'd have to look at the actual state law where it becomes an issue at some point as far as, you know, the number of operators in an establishment there. But certainly if that's a direction the council wants to go in, where it can be no more than one person growing, one caregiver grow in one building or something to that effect, or one caregiver selling. I don't know that that's really, I'll have to check for you, Counselor, on that. I'm not even sure that's really an issue anymore because there's been a lot more flexibility now with the medical marijuana retail and who can sell whose marijuana and whatnot. Originally, it was that people were doing that so they could have just more inventory and have more than one. I'm not even sure that's necessary anymore. I think you can hire other people to sell your marijuana now from just other growers and whatnot. So it may be a moot point, but we can check on that.
Okay, great. And I am also in support of creating a stricter sign ordinance. I do think a lot of it is impacting younger folks in our community. And so I think the school would, and the school committee would share that concern. And let's limit drive-through operations. That sounds horrifying. Thank you.
Counselor Pettingill.
Just to echo the sentiments of almost everybody, I do think we're on the right track with restricting this as much as possible. I'm not pro-pot, I think it's the wrong direction, but that's out of our hands. So while we have the opportunity to get these standards in place, I think that we should.
Anyone else? Outstanding.
So we will start to at least try to draft something up in a little bit more detail that would give some framework to the kind of regulation we're going to employ. I'm assuming at this point that the council is certainly okay with manufacturing, testing, and growing under the right conditions. Just want to verify that you're okay with allowing adult use retail in some locations, because we could say no. We could say no to any of this, but we could say no in particular. I know there's been some concern about retail operations.
So I guess I would want to hear what Corey from Healthy Androscoggin has to say before I can make a. I mean, she's an expert on this. I am not.
Okay.
I think my opinion is the last time Lewiston voted on this, they said no. So without the blessing of the populace, I would not be inclined to support.
Well, I think at this point, given that this obviously is going to be something that's going to be discussed more, is we'll put something together to put in front of you. And then you can decide what you want to allow, what you don't want to allow, and what under what conditions.
And it's worth noting, if you're not aware, that while the adult use, the law has passed, the rules haven't. In fact, that just got delayed again because of appeals and people withdrawing their applications for RFP. So the last I heard, and maybe you know, Counselor, as far as it may be 2020 now, as far as when actual rules get adopted now. So adult use may be well down the road, but we're not alone as far as communities looking to get ahead of it anyway, as far as potentially regulating it, so.
Excellent.
Cool, thank you.
Everyone drive home safe.